Is Lawrence Krauss, who is a professor at the School of Earth and Space Exploration at Arizona State University. Lawrence, appreciate you being with us. What are the logistics of this launch?
Well, first of all, by the way, I'm a retired professor. Let me just point that out. The logistics, space travel is complicated. Every time you launch anything into space, there's lots of potential problems. So it's always a tense moment. The logistics of this, of course, are even more serious than many of the launches which put things into low Earth orbit, as your recent speaker was just talking about. This is going to be what's called a geosynchronous satellite, which means it has to go up to a high enough level so that the period of its orbit around the Earth is exactly the same as the rotation period of the Earth. So it's always pointing in the same direction. As your last speaker pointed out, low Earth orbit means you go around the Earth in about 90 minutes. And you want to keep rising and rising and rising to a level of about, I think, usually around 35,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface. And that means that basically the orbital period is about 24 hours, which of course is the same period that the Earth is rotating. And that requires a lot more power to get up that high. And that's one of the reasons it'll take a few months for this satellite to get up that high. They're going to be aided by the fact that it's being launched directly east near the equator, because the Earth is turning now. And so if you launch in the same direction as the Earth is turning, you get that extra kick because you're starting off from a location that's turning in the direction you want to go to. So that's another useful thing, being the equator and getting and as I understand it, basically it'll be in a somewhat elliptical orbit, and each time it gets to the top, it'll try and get a kick to go higher and higher.
Lawrence, retired or not retired, you haven't lost your touch for explaining things and breaking them down very beautifully, particularly about people like myself who aren't necessarily space experts. But I guess the next thing I want to ask you is, this is a big moment for Turkey. How many other countries are doing this?
Well, I don't know the number of countries, but of course it's an exciting time in space because more and more countries are now taking. It used to be basically a monopoly between the United States and what was then the USSR, and now you're seeing countries all over the world: India, Korea, China, sending probes not just in near Earth orbit, but in fact to the moon and to Mars. And so I think we're beginning to see if you want to call it a democratization of space that didn't exist before. And of course, in this case, for putting satellites around the Earth, the fact that there are private companies like SpaceX really open up the field for other countries, because it's not a monopoly of just the U.S. government. And so I think you're really going to see what's happening now, which is, as far as low Earth orbit is concerned, it's really private industry and private enterprise that's beginning to fill out that mission. When it comes to further missions with to the moon and Mars, those are a lot more expensive and a lot more ambitious, and they're probably government controlled. Now, that's the good part of it. There are some negatives, one should say, because it's pretty crowded up there, and the more stuff we put up there, the more likely that there'll be collisions, and in some senses, sometimes even interfering with astronomical observations. As you may know, SpaceX sent up what's called a Starlink, which again is a communication system involving many small satellites going around the Earth. But there's so many of them that some people sometimes worry they'll get in the field of vision of the large telescopes. So as more countries get involved, which is of course a good thing, because space is for everyone, and all countries should be able to utilize it, as Turkey is now utilizing it to be able to improve their communications and data transfer for their own citizens. But as there are more, we really have to think about making sure there's a concerted effort to organize and not control, but coordinate all of there are tens of thousands of satellites orbiting the Earth right now, many of them defunct. And there's a lot of garbage. And so one has to worry. Now, for this satellite, you won't have to worry because it's going to be way above. It's going to be at 30 to 40,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Most of the space junk, if you wish, is at 100 to 200 miles above the Earth, or 200 to 300 kilometers.
So it's impossible to talk about this without talking about Elon Musk, which interesting development that we've been reporting on in our broadcast. He just became the richest man, surpassing Jeff Bezos. And so we're talking about the accessibility of what Elon Musk has done for space programs. And again, like you mentioned, the United States is no longer held a monopoly. It's no longer, there's privatization, and you can get in. There's accessibility now.
Yeah, no, Elon happens to be an acquaintance of mine, and in fact, I'm happy to say that Elon twice has now given me tours of SpaceX. And the first time I went on that tour, it was just amazing because there's this building, and they were actually building the rockets, the capsules that they were going to use, and it was there. And as he pointed out, it was the first time in a generation or more that actually a new rocket engine had been built in the United States for rockets. And as he joked to me, he said, the thing about it is, it's not really rocket science. The engineering of building a rocket engine is you could almost do it, as in many cases he's done it with off-the-shelf equipment. And the idea was to do it economically, and to do it in a way, as we now see, that many of the components can be reused. You have to credit him for his ambition and daring. I think SpaceX has been remarkable because when he toured me around, we talked about the technical challenges, and each time he said, "Well, there are existing companies that produce this, but for NASA, but they cost." This particular component costs $50,000, so we decided to build it for ourselves for $500, and that kind of thinking has helped make so obviously SpaceX now a major player. And as you say, I think it's really important because I'm a big proponent of government support of science. None of this could have been done if the way hadn't been paved by governments, putting satellites into space. But once that's done, once the technology is well known and you can improve on it as Elon's done, then it's a perfect time for private industry to try and come in line. And right now, NASA should be setting their goals on other things and allowing private industry like SpaceX and to help countries, not just the United States, hopefully not just produce more communications, but use space to make life on Earth better in many ways, not just because we have GPS systems and cell phones that work more efficiently, but also satellites that can look down at Earth and measure it, especially in times of as we're concerned about climate change. I have a new book coming out on climate change. I guess I can't help promote that at the end of the month. And
plug it, Lawrence. Plug it.
Yeah, okay. And the physics of climate change, and to understand what's happening to the planet, we can use satellites and near-Earth satellites to do that. And so it's an exciting time. And I think the fact that the more in some sense, the more operators, the more players in this game, the better. There's competition and also compatibility, because sometimes you want to have more than one. You want to have redundancy. Of course, you want to have redundancy in case one thing fails. So it's exciting to watch, and I wish I was down there watching the launch. I've been invited a few times and I haven't made it down, but maybe sometime I'll get to see one.
You've got to, Lawrence. Our correspondent Mutallab Erdogan has got the best seat in the house. He's in Cape Canaveral. He's going to be there for the launch, and we'll cross back to him when that happens. Lawrence Krauss, we really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us, and especially that personal anecdote. The technology is just absolutely fascinating. Thanks for that, Lawrence.